Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mary Hubble. I am a board member at Gateway City Live, the nonprofit arm of this lovely institution. We're so excited that you're with us tonight. This is going to be a fun night. We're going to hear Phish music and a lot of interesting background to their music and how it all works. So just to let you know, I'm a musician, but I don't know anything about Phish, so I'm going to learn a lot tonight. And when we talked about having a listening event and talking about listening to the music of Phish, I knew exactly who we should invite to talk about it. My friend Jake Cohen, because Jake and I met in New York many years ago, both working on our doctorates. And he has done a lot of presentations on this music. He knows everything about it. He's asked me to let you know that you should feel free to ask any question anytime. So this is not very formal. If the setup looks formal, we don't mean it to be. There are restrooms just around the corner. If you want more beer, head to the bar. You're welcome to bring in beer or anything that you want to drink. And I think that's it. So let's welcome Jake Cohen. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you all so much for being here. This is really fun. And like Mary said, feel free, please, if you have questions about any of the things that I'm talking about throughout this kind of listening session, you can just sort of throw your hand up, and I want it to be a little bit more of a feel less like a lecture and more like a thing that we're all doing together, even though I'm standing on a stage at a podium with a laptop and everything. So, ooh, more people. Excellent. Fantastic. Everybody's coming in now. Sorry we couldn't start at 8:07. That was a little too late for a weeknight. I know 7:30 start time. Everyone's still in the lots at this point. So, oh yeah. Turnout. Walking in at showtime. Classic. All right. So what we're gonna do tonight is basically this is something that we did for the first time in May, and my dear friend Julie, who is here, was part of that session. We did a listening session at the Phish Studies Academic Conference, which was an actual academic conference that we threw in Oregon. It was a lot of fun. You may have seen something about it online. And we sort of did this guided listening session where we listened to music of Phish, and we talked about the ways that the jams are put together and some of the ways that jams sort of work. And the way, basically what we're trying to do is, or what I'm trying to do tonight is share with you how I hear this music as a professional listener, because what I do for a living basically is listen to music and talk about it and put it in words. So not recommended as a way to make a living, by the way. If you're like, oh, that sounds awesome. Don't do it. So I want to emphasize that I'm not telling you how it is. I'm just telling you how I hear it. And if you have questions, again, please feel free to throw your hand up and ask whatever you like. If you want to get up and dance, that's cool. If you want to go grab another beer, please go ahead. Hey, Bennett. Go grab beer, it's fine. The other thing I do want to say is that I will be stopping the music occasionally to talk a little bit. I'm going to try to talk over the music as little as possible, but we will sort of stop a little bit, and hopefully it'll be for me to help you hear what I'm hearing and show you what I'm hearing. I'm going to jump down to the piano to illustrate some things as well. So, again, thank you so much to Gateway City Arts and Gateway City Live for having us here today. This is really cool. All right, so I'm sure many of you guys are fans of Phish, but I'm sure some of you are not. So a quick primer. We have the 4 members of Phish here. And I just wanted to mention that I will be using their names probably more than their instruments. Like I will say, and you hear Trey doing this, rather than, and you hear the guitar doing this, and that is entirely just a function of me being a Phish fan and talking like a Phish fan. So these are the four members of Phish. Mike Gordon in his transitional phase between when he was not wearing a scarf, when he has the scarf but still the long hair. So he's not fully, modern hipster Mike yet. Paige McConnell on keyboards, John Fishman on drums. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight is I think of it like a vertical tasting. So there's a term in wine tasting where you taste through all the different years of the same wine to see how it changes over a course of its life. So we're going to do that, and I figure this is an apt metaphor because we're going to do it with this song, Bathtub Gin. This is a song written by Trey Anastasio, the guitarist, who writes, I would say, the lion's share of Phish's music. And lyrics by his friend Susanna Goodman. This is kind of interesting because the lyrics, this is the only song for which she wrote the lyrics to. This is a relatively old song. It was premiered May 26th, 1989, and it was recorded and released on Phish's second full-length LP, Lawn Boy, which was released in 1990. Phish was formed in 1983, so this is a song that comes from really the sort of second wave of, they had their sort of first wave of originals. This is part of the second wave of originals. It was played it's been played 275 times in their history, which is an average of once every 6 shows, roughly. So this is a song that is regularly part of the Phish repertoire and regularly part of the rotation of Phish songs. So the first version that we're going to listen to, we're going to listen to 3 versions tonight, and then if people still want to stick around and listen to more, we can listen to more, as long as they let us. I thought it would be fun to just listen to a version that doesn't jam at all. So we can sort of see how the song would go in its most sort of raw form, in a state where it's not going to sort of depart on an improvisational journey. So this is going to be a version from 1991. This is a performance from the 10 Mile Room in Breckenridge, Colorado. I looked for a photo to put on this slide, and there aren't any because they had record snowfall a couple years ago and the roof collapsed on this venue, so it doesn't exist anymore. And everything else was just like real estate ads. So this is a song that is, so this performance is 6 minutes and 39 seconds. So this is very short for a version of Bathtub Gin. And the jam is type 1. So what do we mean when we talk about types of jams? This is a post from rec.music.phish. Does anybody remember RMP? Yeah, all right. So before social media was a thing that everybody did, there were 4 rec.music groups. This is a Usenet group. It was text-based like this. It really didn't have a strong interface. You would get it in your email as like a thread. And there was rec.music.gdead, rec.music.beatles, and rec.music.dylan. And then the 4th one ever was rec.music.phish. So it sort of shows Phish's connection to the internet and the growing internet, how strong that was. So this guy, John Flynn, in 1997, he was talking about they were arguing about types of jams, and he says, I think Phish jamming falls into 2 types of jamming. 1, jamming that is based around a fixed chord progression, and 2, jamming that improvises chord progressions, rhythms, and the whole structure of the music. I love that this exists because basically Phish fans invented an analytical language for what they saw as a musical necessity. So Phish fans are, I always say, are the best amateur musicologists. We are very analytical listeners. And so Phish fans realized that there were these 2 kinds of jamming, 2 kinds of improvisations that were happening in their music, and created a language to talk about it. So this jam is type 1, meaning that it stays very strongly within the chord progression of the song. So what is the chord progression of Bathtub Gin? Well, let's look at that. This is a little back of the napkin music theory lesson for you now. When we're talking about, I'm gonna come off mic for a minute. Hopefully you can all hear me. So when we are talking about keys and scales and stuff, basically what we're saying, if we say C major, we're talking about that is a chord. This is C major, right? But that's also a scale, right? So the C major scale looks like this. And I'll play those notes for you. Right? And it can keep going up. And go down and whatnot. There's a few interesting things that happen in a C major scale. One of them, and this, if you're familiar with The Sound of Music, this is the same major scale as the Do a Dear, song. Right. So if you get to the second to last note, the B, you get this moment of tension that happens. Right? Like everyone can hear that, right? Right? Right, exactly. So this is a really important part of what's called Western tonal harmony, the kind of music like Brahms and Beethoven and Mozart and Bach and whatnot. This is lots of dead white men. This is the main sort of building block of that musical language, is this tension between the fact that we feel as though there is something unresolved there, and then that resolution that comes, right? So that's a C major scale. We hear about major scales and minor scales, but there's other scales. Some of them are called modes, doesn't matter why. And those modes have Greek names, also, doesn't matter why. There is one mode called Mixolydian. And this is a really important mode in rock music. And it sounds like this. Right away, you hear that we've lost that tension between that, right? It's a little more laid back. You can kind of, that doesn't need to go to this. You can kind of. It just kind of works. And for those of us who are trained to listen to rock music and popular music, this actually sounds like what most of our music sounds like. Very, very few rock songs actually use that C major scale. Most rock songs use this Mixolydian mode, okay? So when we talk about the Mixolydian mode, we're talking about these notes. So you can remember, it's easy to remember because it's all the notes without any sharps or flats except for B. B is always flat. That's the only one. Okay. We also talk about the chords that can be built on these particular notes in this Mixolydian mode using Roman numerals. So we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7 to indicate that it's B flat instead of B natural, and 1, right? And then there's another language that comes along with this. The chord that's built on the 1 is called the tonic. It's home, okay? It's where we get resolution, it's where we get stability. The chord that's built on 4 is called the subdominant, and the chord that's built on 5 is called the dominant. So let me just play a couple of these for you as well. So that's our tonic, that's our subdominant, that's our dominant, and the dominant has that B natural, which wants to resolve up, right? So this is kind of the foundation of most harmony, and most rock songs, in fact, are sort of founded on this whole idea that you start, maybe some of you have seen that Family Guy episode where Stewie talks about he's playing guitar and it doesn't matter. All right. All right. So tonic, subdominant, dominant, and then that resolution that comes when we come back to tonic, right? So that very bit of tension is built into There's tension there, and then it is released when you go back to tonic, all right? So this is the sort of foundation of Western harmony. If you didn't follow any of that, it's fine. Don't worry. The reason I introduce it all is because I want you to sort of be able to see what we're talking about when we get into the song Bathtub Gin. So this version of Bathtub Gin, again, it is 6 minutes, 39 seconds. It is type 1, so it just is sticking to the original sort of chords of the song. And the main vamp of the song, and by a vamp we mean a repeating bit of music, is these two chords, C major and G minor 7. So as you can see from our from my highlighting here, the C chord uses these three pitches, C, E, and G. Those are from the Mixolydian mode. The G minor 7 chord is in squares or rectangles, and that also uses notes that are only in the C Mixolydian collection. So you'll see significantly it's G minor 7. It's not that dominant, so we don't have that pull. So when you are hearing the main riff from Bathtub Gin, you're hearing and we don't get that pull that you would get if it was a dominant chord. If it was G major 7, it would sound like this, and it's going to sound a little weird. And like it's going to whip itself back into the C chord. It sounds like a Barrel Hall polka song or something, right? It sounds like something Paul McCartney might have written. I love the Beatles. That was just a dig on Paul. All right, so this is our main vamp to Bathtub Gin. Okay. And let's listen to a little bit of this version. So I have this program called Variations Timeline Audio Timeliner, and it does some fun things, if I can find my cursor here. Okay, here we go. So you're going to see that all of the sort of comments that I've made come up in this little box here that's labeled annotations. I apologize if it's a little tough to read. This was sort of the best program I could think to come up with for this kind of event. So, but you can definitely see sort of how I've broken it up in these big sections, right? So there is the section that we're calling the song, which has an introduction, a dissonant piano part, a few verses, and then there's a section I'm calling the riff, right? So let's listen to the song. Get after it.
Making soup for the ambassadors, and I'm in the hallway singing to the troubadours, and the kings are all lined up outside the gate, and the autumn bell is ringing, but they'll just have to wait. Where's the joker? Have you seen him around with his three-coat cap that he wears like a crown? Has he seen his striped stockings and heard his sad tale about the kids under the carpet and the purple humpback whale?
All right, so pretty straightforward so far, right? We have this intro section, which is just the vamp of those two chords. We have this dissonant piano section. So I'll just go back to this for a second. So what I mean by dissonant, and what we mean by dissonant, is that the notes that Page is playing on the piano there are not notes that are part of that C Mixolydian collection, right? So everything, anything, any chords that use the notes from that collection would sound like they work with this. But he's playing notes that aren't part of that collection, so it sounds like it doesn't work. It's very sort of noisy, and it's very sort of, crushing up against itself. Now, there's a reason that Page is doing this, and that is that this song uses, sort of takes its inspiration from a song, a piece by George Gershwin that was composed in 1924 called Rhapsody in Blue. So it's called Rhapsody in Blue. And you can hear a little bit of that same kind of discordant piano work in this. So it's a similar kind of thing that that Page is doing there. All right, so let's go back to verse 2.
Here come the ambassadors, they show up one by one. Fred is tasting all the soup to see if it is done. And Wendy's on the windowsill, waiting to be let in. And we're all in the bathtub now, making bathtub gin. When the kids storm the hallway, they climbed up through the gate. They didn't mean to be impolite, but they just couldn't wait. Here comes the Joker with his silly grin. He carries a martini made of bathtub gin.
I'm going to pause it one more time because, in fact, Page is actually quoting part of Rhapsody in Blue right there. So it's not just that's not just him sort of playing more similar kinds of stuff, but he's actually quoting. So it's kind of fun. I mean, this is one of the few instances where Phish is like directly quoting. There's only, I think, one other that I can think of where they're very clearly and obviously quoting another song in one of their original compositions. The other one being the quoting of "Let It Be" in "Sleeping Monkey." All right, so now let's go back and we're gonna listen to the third verse. It starts out sounding the same, but then it gets cut short.
Here comes the Joker, we all must laugh, cause we're all in this together, and we love to take a bath.
Pause, and then we get into the riff. So this riff is also just C, G minor 7, back and forth. So the riff is constructed in this AABA form where it's the melody is repeated, a new melody, and then the melody is repeated again. And that's also kind of a nod to Gershwin because this is the form of most Tin Pan Alley Broadway songs that Gershwin was actually writing. So how does this riff go? This is important because the riff is going to be a big part of later jams. The riff is, again, mostly notes from that C Mixolydian collection. So it's... So far, all notes from that collection. And then we get a new one, that note right there. All right, and it lines up nicely with the chords as well. So, I'm not a good piano player. I'm not even gonna try. I'm a horrible piano player. I have like really bad independent hand abilities. Anyways, take my word for it, they work out nicely. So yeah, I can play one-handed really well. Okay, and then that B flat that ends there is again part of that Mixolydian collection, and it also lines up really nicely with the second chord of the vamp, which is that G minor 7. Right, and then there's the B section, right? So. And it goes to F, which is the second chord of that B section. So. And then again, we get that note that just wants to fall back to that note, right? So this is an E flat going back to C. And it has this sort of darker color to it. Right? Okay. So that's the riff. It's important to remember it because we're going to hear it a lot in parts of the jam. And now the riff repeats. Paige and Trey sing along with it. So I'm gonna ask you guys to take my word for it. This repeats again, right? I feel like we should just skip ahead to the meat of it. So. So now we get into the jam. Now in 1991, a bathtub gin jam was mostly just Trey elongating notes of that riff. So you're gonna hear all those notes from that riff, but stretched out. So they're not falling in the right rhythm. So instead of ba, da 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 da, you might hear ba, da 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 da, or something like that. He does it better than I do. You're gonna see I have some little notes in here. You can sort of follow along. So he's playing this dissonant thing. So let's just listen to that little bit again. So he's doing this really cool thing here where he is, Trey is playing these tritones against the riff. So the riff is, again, we've got this chord, and he's going. That sounds rough to our ears, right? So we have this sort of. And that almost acts like a signal to the rest of the band for, let's get weird here. Let's move away from what is comfortable and let's push it. And they do. And the rest of the band, immediately right away, John Fishman, the drummer, hears that and starts playing off the beat. Because he goes, oh, something's off. I'm going to start playing off the beat. And then Paige adds in other notes that aren't part of that C Mixolydian. So he starts doing a lot of. Again, really noisy stuff. So, and then it comes back to C, and it feels like, okay, we came back to something, so. back to C, right? So at this point, the band starts to establish groupings of measures. So when we talk about a measure, we're talking about counting beats, right? So if you listen to hip hop, you know how to count beats, right? 1, 2, 3, into the faux, right? This song is also in 4 beats per measure, right? So we're hearing, that's our metronome. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, right? So what they start to do here, when we get to this moment where it's sort of back to the tonic, they play a 4-measure phrase, and that makes sense because our riff, ba da 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 3 2 3 4 and 4 2 3 4 1. Right, so the riff is 4 measures long. So it makes sense that they would think in 4-measure units in this song, in this jam. And when we get to this final stage, they start to play, all right, 4 measures where it's sort of normal and we're hearing that riff and it's working, and then 4 measures where it's dissonant and it's really working against it. And so they start to create these things called hypermeasures, which are large groupings. And instead of just downbeats and upbeats, you get these large structural upbeats and downbeats. So I'll sort of conduct this for you, right? Because when you see a conductor, they're sort of they're making like a sort of 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Right? So 4 1 2 3 4. So there's a downbeat, right? Downbeat, and then here we go, downbeat. And then that's 4, and now it's it's kind of, so we can think of that as a big upbeat, and you can actually think of these hypermeasures. 1. Is all the upbeat, and then stability there. 3, 4, and now instability. And stability. And now they're just playing against each other as much as they can, right? Page is very dissonant, it's chaotic. Right?
Thank you.
I like it. You can hear Trey laugh because he's like, "Oh, that sucked." But the only way they can end it is by Trey going bathtub gin, and like they all hear, okay, this is the end of it, right? Okay, so this is an early version of Bathtub Gin. This is how it sounded when they were still kind of figuring out how this song would improvise. All right, so I'm gonna pause here because we're gonna skip ahead 7 years, and we're gonna go to a very different version of Bathtub Gin. So if anybody has any questions so far, I know I threw a lot of music theory at you. I apologize for all of that, but feel free to ask any questions at this point. Yeah?
When did the crowd start saying we're all in this together?
We're going to listen to the version. That was the first ever version, February 22nd, 2003. And that is the third version we're going to listen to tonight. So there you go. The question was, when did the crowd start chanting, and we love to take a bath, instead of Trey singing it? And it was February 22nd, 2003. I listened back to a lot of versions to figure that out at one point. And that's a topic for another thing about band fan interaction and stuff like that. Cool, we're good? Awesome. All right, so the next version we're going to listen to is one of my favorites. It might be one of your favorites as well. This is the version. Oh, and just to sort of recap, so this jam stayed firmly in C major. The riff was always present or implied. You always could hear da 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 da, or at least you could imagine hearing it over it. The tension was created by dissonance, so it was all about playing notes that aren't in that C mixolydian collection. So these notes, F, E flat, F sharp, A flat, that's all that stuff that Page was sort of banging away on. Rhythmic displacement is a big thing, right? Things shifting and feeling like they're rhythmically out of place. Lots of chromatic melodies and progressions. That's what I was sort of doing at the end, where I was just, banging the piano keys upward. This is what we call a chromatic sort of progression, where it's just moving up by the smallest increment possible. And there's no hierarchy, there's no pull or anything. It's just sort of open space. And then the riff is used to signal stability and to release tension, right? So when we do finally hear that, ba, da, 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 that's kind of a signal, okay, we're back in a comfortable, stable place, right? And that's important to remember because that's gonna come in handy when we get into much longer improvisations. All right, so our next version is the Riverport Gin. This is a version from summer 1998, July 29th, 1998, at the Riverport Amphitheater in suburban St. Louis, Missouri. And this jam lasts 23 minutes and 35 seconds. So the first one we just listened to was 6 minutes and something. This one is 23 minutes. I'm gonna do a lot less talking during it. The jam starts out as a type 1 jam, so it stays within that C, G minor 7 sort of framework, and C major specifically, but it will eventually move to a type 2 jam. So again, remember, that is when the sort of inherited chord progression and rhythm of the song, which is that vamp and that rhythm and everything, gets abandoned, and the band spontaneously makes up a brand new chord progression and a brand new rhythms. This version opened the show, and so that's significant because usually Phish will play a few versions. They'll play a few shorter songs to get into a show, and then eventually they will start to put in some lengthier improvisations later in the set. But this version is just, all killer, no filler, right from the very beginning. Yes?
So by type 2 improvisation, do you mean, or does the poster mean that the melody is maintained consistently at pitch?
Yeah.
Or does that mean absolutely free improvisation away from the original everything, away from the original melody and chord progression and rhythm?
That's a great question. So the question was, what does type 2 mean that the melody is maintained, or does it mean that everything is different? And the short answer is that because this is a terminology that is sort of, it was an ad hoc term that was created on an as-needed basis, it was created specifically to address the fact that people would hear new rhythms or new harmonies or new melodies. Obviously, in any kind of improvisational setting, and especially with Phish, there's going to be new melodies constantly. That is the sort of thing that is being improvised most, is, and specifically from Trey playing melodic leads on the guitar, right? So those are gonna be new melodies. They might be based on the original melody, but they might not. They might just be based on the key of the original melody. Most of the time, when people talk about type 2 jamming, what they're really talking about is a key change, a harmonic change. But that is not dogma in any way. So it can really just sort of mean any kind of change, any kind of significant departure from the recognizable song. So if you can still hear elements of the song that it came from, it's a type 1 jam. If it no longer sound, if you have to turn to your buddy and be like, hey, what song is this? Or is this still Bathtub Gin? Then it's a type 2 jam. And the cool thing is that, and the third version we're gonna listen to tonight, it's very clearly still Bathtub Gin, but it sounds nothing like that Bathtub Gin. And that's one of the reasons I love that version. So this version, as we can see, it starts in C major, which is the key of Bathtub Gin. And we don't really hear the Bathtub Gin melody, but it's C major and it's C mixolydian jamming the whole way. And then about halfway through, all of a sudden it changes keys and everything changes as well. So this is an instance where not only do they change keys, but they change the texture, they change the rhythm, they change their timbres, right? The sounds that they're playing. So whether that's with actually Page McConnell changing the keyboards that he's playing, moving from grand piano to Fender Rhodes or to organ or to synthesizers, or if it's Trey or Mike adding effects pedals to their sound, or it can often just be Fishman who, he doesn't have pitched instruments, so he can't change keys, but he will hear that they're changing keys and he will respond to it by changing something in the beat. So we're gonna hear all that at that G minor change. Then it flips to G major, which is a really easy flip. It's just one note changes, and then it comes back and finishes in C major. So let's go ahead and get into this. Riverport Gin. And you can see already, looking at, so this was our first one. It's 3 little mounds. It's very nice. They're all about the same length. This is proportional. So the song part, the riff, and the jam are all about the same length. And now if we look at this, it is quite different, right? The song is just this little area here. The riff is just this, and then this is the jam. I'm gonna skip the song, if that's all right. We've already listened to it. It's a simple song. I think we can all get it in our ears. One thing actually that is fun though is to listen to how much Page's dissonant piano playing has changed over the years. That first version, he was playing a dinky electric piano. My friend, she says she can't listen to early Phish because she can't stand the sound. She's a professional pianist. She says she can't stand the sound of the piano and it's like hurts her ears. So now he's playing a baby grand that's on stage with them every night. Really kind of vibrates there, doesn't it? Okay. So now let's get into the jam. We'll listen to the end of we'll listen to the last repetition of the riff, and then we'll go right into the jam. So a couple things to sort of listen for in this. I will sort of come down here and just emphasize things a little bit. I'll emphasize certain notes that we're gonna hear Trey sustaining. So we're gonna hear a lot of him playing notes of that C major chord. C, E, and G. So I'll sort of yell those out a little bit, and play them so you know. And then one of the big things we hear in this jam is something called an arpeggio, which in music is when you take a chord and you play it not at the same time, but sequentially. So you can play it up or you can play it down. And so we're gonna hear a significant portion of this jam is built around Trey just going. It sounds simple and bad when I play it, but it sounds really great when they do it in this setting. Okay, so here we go. That's my terminology, C major glory jam, sorry. That's just hyper measures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. One, 2, 3. Here, Page has started doing this. So he started going. So that is introducing a chord that's not part of the regular vamp. That's not this. That's not that. It's a different chord. It's this one. And you can even start adding in a couple other colorful notes to it. All right, that's kind of how he's building his part here. So he's introducing this idea, hey, maybe we should add in this F chord, this C-F progression, and the rest of the band is like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. That's what we usually do in this song. All right. Come those arpeggios. Trey just keeps playing this over and over, and the rest of the band grows around it. right, so sorry to stop it there, but just wanted to, I know, it's horrible. It's like I'm worse than a show talker. All right, so we get this moment here. So this entire 3-minute section has just been and Trey is following the chord progression that Page had set up before. So that he's just following this these chord changes. And Mike is doing the same. He's playing bass notes that correspond to those two chords. So that's the 1-4, the C, F. That's what I mean by 1-4 there. So now we get to this, what I call the peak jam. So this is where everything sort of builds up to a highest moment of range on the guitar. So Trey's gonna play the highest note he plays throughout this jam, and the loudest sort of intensity, the most sort of activity from the drums. Everything is sort of going full bore here. And what we're gonna hear, a few things, I stopped it right here because Trey has decided to hang out on this note for a second, which is the third note of that C major chord, right? And he's gonna go up a little bit more note by note until he gets to the highest note of that chord. So we're gonna hear him soloing around on this. And it kind of keeps going up, and he keeps playing these important notes on important beats in the structure. So it really sort of foregrounds that this is definitely C major still. All right, let's get back to it. All right. There's that E. Playing lower so that he has somewhere he can go still. There he goes. Here's the peak. So we have just gotten to this big sort of moment here, right? And now where do we go, right? We can't keep going higher because they've already gotten there, and this isn't the Disco Biscuits. So you're all here and not in Vermont, so I can say that. And I'm a huge Biscuits fan, so don't worry about it. And if we listen to just like this little, where we were at the very beginning of this section. This is the very beginning of the jam. And then where we are at the end of the jam. You can see just how far we've come here. So now, instead of Trey playing C again, which he's been really hammering on, he's gonna, he at the very end of this jam, right before it ends, he starts playing a new riff, and it goes like this. So he starts going, it's like an arpeggio, but it's not exactly. He just starts going. So he's really focusing on that C, but he's playing a couple of notes from the C Mixolydian scale that lead into the C. G, B flat, and C. And this almost acts as like a way for him to signal his bandmates, hey, I'm not just playing, I'm not just doing that, but I'm doing this instead. And in doing that, the rest of the band goes, okay, let's back off a little bit and let's try to move into something new here. And the first note of that little riff that Trey was playing is G. And this becomes very important moving forward. So what we're gonna see here is that I'm calling this a transition jam because you can see at this second level, the way I've organized this jam, there's this C major sort of glory sounding jam at the beginning, and then there's a G minor funky jam in the second half. And this is the transition between the two. So we're gonna start off at the end of that C major jam, and the first thing that happens is they're gonna get rid of that second chord. So instead of 1-4, it's just gonna be 1 again. It's just gonna be C. And that's done through Mike and Page mostly. So they stop playing that second chord. And then eventually, Mike is going to hear that Trey has been playing that G and is gonna go, you know what? Instead of playing C, I'm just gonna play G. And then that transitions the whole thing. So let's listen to this part of the jam. Mike is just playing C now. Mike is just doing this. Mike is just going. Just outlining 2 notes of a C major scale, G and C. But again, it's G and C. Those are the important notes that he's doing. Just doing that. Mike is playing bum 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 ba-dum bum. So Mike was going bum bum ba bum 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 ba bum bum, and now he's just doing boom bum ba bum bum. Bum, bum, bum. Just G. rhythmically, right? Mike is just playing G. But he's not playing it really low, so it doesn't have that effect of like establishing the bass. Now there's that low G. It's like, oh yeah, we're definitely in G minor now. Trey and Mike start playing this riff where they're just going. Again, it's G and B flat. And those are two of the notes that make up G minor. So part of the reason G minor works so well in this context is, if we go back to this, we see that. So G Dorian, which is another scale, it's the scale that you play over minor chords, is the same exact pitches as C Mixolydian. So all they had to do was just change the orientation of the pitches, but keep the exact same pitches, and it sounds totally different. So, for example, the Mixolydian is, if I just start on G instead of C, it has that sort of darker minor key tone. Right? And so we get a lot of this. That sort of pulls us into that minor feeling. All right, let's keep going. It's gonna get sort of this funky texture keeps going here. And a lot of this is caused by now not the notes that they're playing, but the ways that they're playing it, right? So Trey is playing his wah-wah pedal, right? So the right. Fishman is playing the sort of heavy on the ride cymbal, a lot of cowbell in here. Mike is sort of playing a very centered groove on G. He's not jumping around a ton. And it's really more about texture and rhythm than like fireworks soloing the way it was in the first part of this jam. All right, let's get it. That riff. New riff. C is important. That's C. remarkable is that they're not playing that many different notes. This is all about texture and rhythm right now. So right there, Fishman changes the beat again. So it's signaling another sort of new thing is about to happen, right? And what's cool about this part here is that all of a sudden the piano now is coming into the sound. So it was just organ for a while. Now all of a sudden the piano is coming back. And what Page does here is he starts to play G minor chords, but he also adds in some G major chords, and we get a little bit of what's called mode mixture. So, because the only difference between a G major chord and a G minor chord is one pitch, and it's just this. So there's a really nice sort of clash that happens between the G major from Page and everybody else doing stuff in G minor. So you'll hear a little bit of this B natural, which, remember, is not part of our Mixolydian collection, but it works in this situation because you get that sort of nice bluesy dissonance that happens. The other cool thing I love about this is that Trey is basically doing all of this with just these 3 or 4 notes. He's just kind of doing. And that's it. But he's making so much sort of exciting things happen by how fast he's able to sort of recombine those notes and create new little small melodies within that. This is all about like small little melodies being combined. It's not about these sort of big, long, grandiose sort of, you know, Eddie Van Halen style jams or anything like that. All right, let's keep going. Now, all of a sudden, Trey has started playing one of his favorite chords to play, 9th chords. So we've got our G minor, and if we just keep going up and adding new notes that are not part of the G minor chord, we can extend that chord. So we can make a G minor 7, which remember was one of those original 2 chords that was part of the Bathtub Gin Vamp. Or we can make it G minor 9th with added another note. And if this was a wah-wah pedaled guitar, this would sound right? And if you've listened to any Phish from 1997 or 1998, this is a very, very, very familiar sound. It's just a really comfortable chord for Trey to sort of play over and over again. And it often functions as a signal for him to the rest of his bandmates of, I want to move to a new segment, because he's adding new pitches, he's expanding the harmonic vocabulary, and we're sort of moving into new areas now. So we're gonna hear those 9th chords, the This was the show opener, right? And this is definitely a turn to your neighbor and ask, what song is this still? You know, is this still Bathtub Gin? Yes. More of those ninth chords. So now we really hear that mode mixture from Page. Trey picks up that Page is doing G major, decides to join him. Now they're just being silly, right? Right? Yeah. Okay. All right, any questions? Please do, if you have any questions about the particulars of this jam or places where I walk through, we can go back and revisit little moments if we want, but we do have one more jam to listen to as well. If you want to, we can move on to that. So, but be happy to entertain any questions.
I was a Phish.
Go to school for 10 years for this crap. All right. So, I mean, and actually, you know, I do want to just sort of, I know that was, you know, kind of a said in jest, but also like, again, like we all hear, you know, those of us who are Phish fans, we all hear this in the same way. I just have a vocabulary to talk about it, right? But you guys are all hearing this, you know, the exact same way. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why people go to Phish shows so much is that we are hearing these things. And intuitively, we understand this. I mean, we invented a language to talk about it with this type 1, type 2 jamming. We intuitively understand that Phish starts somewhere, goes away from it, and maybe comes back. And that those are our favorite parts of the show, when they go away and hopefully don't come back, right? They just keep going, right? Yeah, question?
Yeah, so many.
Yes.
But generally, when they go off on these tangents, like how much of that is kind of relatively known to the band? Like how much of it is kind
Right.
of rehearsed by practicing?
I mean, that's a great question.
Versus, like, are they literally just writing a new
Sure.
thing?
So I forget, I think it's either Charlie Parker or John Coltrane. I can't remember who says it, but they say, like, you learn all the scales and you practice, everything, thousands of hours so that you can just go up on stage and just play, right? So that is, one of the things that they're doing here. But there are patterns that happen frequently, and I'm happy that we're gonna get to listen to another jam because this other jam starts in a similar way. So Bathtub Gin almost always does this 1/4 thing at the beginning, right? So Bathtub Gin will almost always abandon the vamp chords, right? And they'll jam in C major for a little bit. And then usually they'll jump to that 4 chord. And I think there's the recent podcast, Long May They Run, that some of you may have been listening to. There's an interview with Mike Gordon where he says, oh yeah, sometimes like maybe we'll we'll go to a new key, like, something other than 4, which is the key that we always go to, and he kind of says it as a joke because they often go to it. But there's a good reason for that. It's one of the sort of foundational progressions in rock music. I mean, this 1/4 thing, and we're gonna hear this in the next song, And that's Hey Jude, right? Na 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 Hey Jude, or Saint Stephen with a rose in and out of the garden. Right? So it's all, this is just like part of the DNA of rock music. That being said, there are pivot points that they can take that are sort of decisions made in the moment. The reason they go to G minor in this section right here is because Mike decides at this point right here to, instead of playing C, G like he had been, so he's going, or down here. Instead of doing that, all of a sudden he just goes. He stops playing the C, he's just playing the G, and the rest of the band hears it and goes, oh, let's go to G minor. So that's sort of a decision made in the moment. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. So let us do this last one. Do you guys want me to stop it less? Talk like how should we just listen through parts of this and then come back and talk afterwards, or do you terribly mind me stopping occasionally to talk about it? I can try to do it less, but do me. All right, I will do me then. Thank you. All right. So double time. All right. So we're gonna get to that. This is the 22203 Bathtub Gin from the US Bank Arena in Cincinnati, Ohio. It is 26.5 minutes long or so. It's part of a 5-song second set, which are these sort of revered white whales of Phish fans because it means that there were a bunch of big jams in them. The overall harmonic structure of this jam, you'll see, is it never veers from C. It's just C major, C minor, C major. It stays in C the entire time. So this is a great example of one of these jams where the harmony doesn't really veer too much from C as a tonal center, but we end up getting a variety of rhythmic and textural elements that really change things up in this jam. So this is the only one that we're listening to that I was in attendance at. This was one of my favorite shows of 2003, and I love this show. This is just one of my favorite bathtub gins. So just as an example of one of the things that we're gonna hear in this, I've given you a little rhythmic diagram of how the bathtub gin riff usually works. So You can sort of bouncing ball here with me. These are the beats, and the pluses are the upbeats. So da 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 da. Right, and those are the black notes are, or the black boxes are ones where there's a note. Right, so this is just rhythm. We're not looking at pitch at all here. Right, and what I've done in orange here, I've highlighted the downbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And the white arrows are other important downbeats where you have a beginning of a phrase. So 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 2, 2, 3 and 4, 3, 2, 3 and 4 and 4, 2, 3. Right? So you can hear that the riff really emphasizes that first downbeat, this note. What we're going to hear in this jam is Trey is going to play the riff correctly, exactly as it sounds, but he's going to shift the rhythm of it entirely. So instead of da 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 da. He's gonna go da 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 da. And that last note is gonna hold over the downbeat. So instead of a note on the downbeat, we're gonna get the end of the riff on that downbeat, and it's gonna sound wrong. That's just one part of what's going on at one point in this jam. But I wanted to sort of show you how the rhythm can just shift like that and really do a lot. Okay. This is the first version of Bathtub Gin where the audience sings along on the third verse. So we'll get that.
Here comes the Joker. We all must laugh, cause we're all in this together, and we love to take.
And everyone goes nuts, because that's the first time that it happened. Massive glow stick war ensues. People throw glow sticks at Trey. Trey catches them, which just inspires more people to throw glow sticks at him. He then throws one behind his back into the crowd and slams someone in the front row in the face with it. So the very beginning of this jam, you can actually hear Trey go, "Whoa!" because he smacked this person in the face with a glow stick, and then he walks to the front of the stage, is like, "Are you okay?" And the person is like, "Ah!" You know. And then Trey's like, "Okay, good." And then he starts jamming. It's really funny. You can hear like he doesn't start jamming right on the downbeat of the jam. So we'll play just the end of the riff there because it's pretty funny. All right, this jam, you can see that unlike the other jams where there were like large groupings, this one's pretty sequential. There's just like a jam segment and then another jam segment and then another jam segment and then another. So we're gonna get a sort of typical C major jam, typical to what we've been hearing in that last Bathtub Gin, where they're going to start to add in that 1/4 thing. And then Trey is going to create a 4-chord descending progression, and the rest of the band is going to buy in fully, and it's great. Then we have a C minor sort of blues rock moment, and then it sounds like everything's gonna sort of chill out, and all of a sudden Fishman just kicks it into double time. He literally doubles the speed of his beat, and it pushes the whole thing to like another level. So we get this double time jam, and then in this middle section here, the beat falls away and it's meterless. So there is no sense of a tactile sort of pulse. There's no sense of any kind of like beat. When the beat finally does come back in, it's gonna be polyrhythmic, which means that there are multiple different rhythms happening at the same time and they're all interlocking. And then finally, we get the end riff again. So let's listen to the very end of the, and you can hear Trey go, "Whoa, whoa." Here's the good one, it's right here. So the jam starts, and he's not playing. And then he just is like, big C note. Sustains the C, and then immediately moves to B flat. So that's that Mixolydian mode again. So Paige is starting to give us so they're all playing C just to be like, yes, we're definitely in C. Mike starts to play. Boom, boom, dun, dun. Back to more of that C. There's the riff a little bit. Paige echoes it. All right, so what we're gonna hear coming up now is that Trey is gonna start playing a riff that outlines what's called a C7 chord. So that's just the 4 notes spaced out of a Mixolydian scale. So C, E, G, and B flat. So he's gonna kind of do this. He's gonna play with that idea a little bit. So we're gonna hear. And then eventually he's gonna realize, oh, I can play that, but instead of just going, I can change that top note and bring it down one at a time in a descending chromatic sequence. So he's gonna give us. That's that first one, and then. So we get this kind of. And the rest of the band is gonna pick up on that, and they're gonna go, oh, we can play chords that correspond to that. And those chords are the ones that, the sort of Hey Jude riff, so they're gonna do this sort of. All right, and Mike the whole time is just kind of staying in C for a lot of it. So really what we're hearing is a lot of like surface coloration where Paige is giving us a lot of the movement. So. And Trey just repeats that riff over and over and over again. He builds it up, and we just get this beautiful sort of descending 4-chord progression. Trey is just playing C's. Then you can hear him figuring it out. How's it gonna go? There he's got it. And there he's got it. And now he's got this idea, so he repeats it. Fishman changes his beat. I hear you. And Fishman is accenting those chromatic notes, right? So he's giving us. Mike is playing the bass notes. Now Trey just starts soloing over. Arpeggios again from 1998, right? Mike starts to play this E flat note. Play it for you so you can hear it. Mike starts to give us a lot of. He just plays it in passing a little bit, but it's enough to signal, okay, we've let that 4-chord thing run its course. Let's do something new now. And they decide to go for a sort of C minor blues rock jam. Now, why C minor? Well, they're already in C major. And all you have to do is change one note, and you get into C minor. So it's pretty easy. This is like a. Is that 4-chord progression similar to a Mind Left Body jam? It is not. It is very so. Deadheads and Phish heads are very inclined anytime they hear a descending 4-chord chord progression to think it is Mind Left Body. I have been guilty of this in the heat of the moment at a show as well. Oh, that was Mind Left Body. No. Mind Left Body is a very specific chord progression that. Julie, do you know? Yeah. It's not that. But there are similarities in that it is like that sort of descending chromatic thing from like a flat 7 down to 5, right? I think that. I'd have to like re-listen to a real good Mind Left Body jam to really pick up on it and clarify. But they're all sort of these similar kinds of. Improvisational rock music really likes these sort of descending 4-chord progressions because they're easy to hear and they really deliver a big payoff when you can pause on that sort of tension-filled last chord and then whip back into the tonic chord. So you get this like constantly falling sense, like it just keeps falling down. It's like the riff from Terrapin Station. It seems like it keeps going over and over again, but it's really just the same notes over and over again, but it sounds like it's going everywhere, right? There's a similar kind of thing where it's like this endless kind of progression, it sounds like. But yeah, no, great question. All right. Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Absolutely. That's definitely it. And it's funny because Mr. Completely was written by this time, so that is a idea that Trey might have in his sort of mind somewhere. But doing this sort of descending chromatic thing is not that groundbreaking, but what's groundbreaking is I think the way that he manages to find it here and signal in the moment seamlessly to the rest of his bandmates that we're all going to go to it, right? Yes, the Phish debuted Mr. Completely later that summer. I was in the front row for that show. It's a good time, good time. I didn't have to wait all day either to get in the front row because it was Utah. All right. Here we go. All right, so we're going to turn this to C minor. We're going to abandon that descending riff. Trey really is like, just C all. Trey hears Mike playing E flat and decides, I'm going to meet you in C minor. There it is. I hear little bits of like life during wartime. Dun, 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 dun. Just a similar rhythm though. I love that moment because Trey's like, I'm gonna go out and do something, and then he's like, no, that's not right. And it's because Fishman kind of went, and Trey's like, okay, let's do it, and then no, and you can just hear him rein it back in right away. Hold on 1 second, I just want to play that again. Yeah, hold on. Nope. Yeah, sorry. I would not call this evil Phish quite yet. I would call later in this jam, we might get some evil Phish. I think when people talk about evil Phish, what they're really talking about is a sort of darkness in tone and timbre that is unlike what we are used to. This is very sort of typical. I mean, this is kind of like jock rock, it's very sort of like, it's kind of got that James Gang kind of feel to it. And I think that the other thing that we really emphasize when we talk about evil Phish is a sort of really dissonant quality that we don't have here. This is still, it's minor, right? But there's a lot of minor key Phish. When we say evil Phish, and it's, of course, this is all subjective, we're really talking about like, you know, a dark kind of spookiness that where you're like, do I need to leave? Do I need to leave? Like, the MSG 2012 Carini is the Piper outro jam from the Island Tour. Also, I once had to turn it off because. Yeah. Oh yeah. Providence Bowie. I think there's still people hiding under their seats. There's a friend of mine has a story about a guy who was standing next to him during that David Bowie, and apparently he was hiding under his chair because the band was screaming, "Go, go, do it now," and like playing, and the band, and yeah, this guy was freaking out, as well he should have been. All right, and they were like, and Fishman was going, "Lassie." All right, back to this. All right. So Trey turns on the wah-wah pedal. This next section is all Fishmen, all the drums. The sense that we're now moving back to C major from that C minor section. All right, so right here, this is the difference between C major and C minor. Right? And Trey is going to very unequivocally start playing. So it's just clearly C major. And it gets to the point where even Mike hears him and starts going and just repeating it. So that moved right back to C major and everybody sort of hops on. almost 17 minutes into the song, and Trey's gonna bring the riff back a little bit. So Fishman really brings it down. So they could have ended it here. Like, they're ready to end the song. Right. All Trey would have to do is go da 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 da, and it would just end. But this is the moment where I think Phish jams go from being pretty good to amazing. It's when they could have stopped, but they fight through and they make themselves keep going, and that's when something really magical happens. So Trey's playing, or Page is going da 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 da, bringing it back to that Mixolydian feel. And all of a sudden, Trey comes in with the riff. You can hear it there. So this is all C major stuff. Fight bell, right? So what we're going for now, all of a sudden, is this kind of sonic weirdness, right? So instead of harmonic weirdness or rhythmic weirdness, we've got lots of different kinds of digital things happening. So there's a delay loop going where Trey is just playing the notes C and G, but they're kind of on a this kind of looping artificial sound. Page is playing lots of synthesizers and organ. Mike is just playing the note G. So even though we've got a lot of C happening, Mike is just doing this, but it's not a sonorous bass note. It's not one of those notes that like fills the sound of with the harmony. It's muted, so it's almost more percussive than anything. So it doesn't really give us a strong harmonic basis. So even though we're in C major, it doesn't feel like we're in anything familiar. And this whole space is just really opening up for like weird noises and sounds in here. So I'll give us a little back here. Fight bell. Trey starts playing some dissonant notes. So now Fishman starts giving us a pulse. So at any moment, we could go to the beginning. And I think Fishman realizes that. And so he just does this. Mike is just playing C major stuff. But it's weird. By weird, it's because, huh? Early Plinko, yeah. Muted staccato, please. No, I'm just kidding. So Mike is doing this. So he's leaping up a giant span on his bass, which is weird for a bassist, because he's kind of going. And we can hear everyone else is doing all this crazy stuff. Fishman is giving us this, the beat is just not what he's playing. He is accenting everything else. So we have multiple different rhythms coming at the same time from both Mike, Fishman, and Page. And this is where Trey decides he's going to play the riff, but he's going to play it without any adherence to the perceptible beat. And this is where I think it gets a little evil, because it sounds so wrong, and it's something that's so familiar. The Bathtub Gin riff is, Trey was ending his acoustic shows by having the audience sing it and walking off stage, and the audience is singing this relatively complex riff throughout the entire encore break. And so this is a riff that Phish fans know, and it is weird, and it's wrong, and it's great. Downbeat is right there. No one's playing on it. It's wrong. It's so wrong. And even the beat that's happening, Trey is not even paying attention to it. It's like he's completely out of the music. Right. It's weird. This is my favorite kind of Phish. So now Trey's playing on the riff, or on the beat, but not in the right place. And that last note falls on the downbeat. And it sounds wrong, right? It's like, eventually they're gonna come back to it. So this tension is just building. When are they gonna fix it, right? You can see when they're gonna fix it. rest of the band joins Trey. And then right back to the original. Yeah. That's really good. All right, so I mean, this jam, I think the cool thing about it for me is the way that we get these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different little jam segments as I count them. And you could, group those or split those up as many different ways as you want. But I hear at least these 6 sort of distinct different sections that have varying melody, harmony, rhythm, texture, and timbre. So, I think the cool thing about listening to these 3 different versions of this one song is that we can hear how, with the most basic of musical materials, just C major and a C mixolydian scale, Phish is able to sort of craft these long improvisational journeys through this sort of shared understanding of listening to each other, taking cues from one another, and being willing to sort of take the risk to go to those places. I hear you doing that, and I'm gonna go with you there, even if it's not what I'm doing and we didn't talk about doing it, but I'm gonna go there. And these are examples of when it goes well. And I think that, a lot of times we give the band a lot of grief for ending a jam before we think it should end. And I think a big reason for that is because, well, the band didn't think that they were, that the jam had anywhere else to go. We did. We're listening. We're like, oh, this is great. It could keep going. But, these are examples where the band does keep going, And I think that this is really the sort of centerpiece of the Phish listening experience. This is also not the ideal situation. Ideally we would all be dancing at a show, watching the lights and with all of our friends. So, that's a huge part of it as well. I study that stuff as well, but we're not going to talk about that today. So, please feel free. Does anybody have any other questions about this jam or any of the other jams? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about this particular riff. Seems like Trey really likes, obviously extensively in this version.
Right.
Often we'll go back and play with it and play it double time if needed. Are there like melodic qualities that sort of make it more amenable to that than something like Disease?
Well, it's the full scale. It's basically the entire C mixolydian scale from one octave to the next. So at any point in the jam, Trey can play a note that's in the C mixolydian collection and be playing one of the notes that's in the riff. So at any point he could be going, if he's at da 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 da, he's at that F da, he could go da 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 da. He could sort of just, his fingers are in a place that he remembers, oh, this is that note in the Bathtub Gin riff, and so I'll play it. This is a jam in particular, though, where I think this riff really signals a kind of sense of stability. And so they'll often come back to it and they'll insert it as like a pivot point or a stabilizing point when they've really gone away from it. That 91 version that we listened to, that's the entire the entire conceit in that 91 version is we're either playing the riff or we're not playing the riff, right? And when we're playing the riff, it's stable, and when we're not, it's dissonant and tension-filled, and that's how they build tension, right? I think also Bathtub Gin is a song that almost always ends. Like, it almost always comes back to the riff, whereas a song like Down with Disease is often left unfinished. So there's a sense that you're gonna hear it again at some point, you know? I think this is also a song that doesn't, it does sometimes go out like it did in these last two versions, but often it stays in that sort of type 1 territory where it's just building around C major with that C, F kind of alternation. And it's great, those are great, you know? But it doesn't, my brother was like, oh, I bet the Baker's Dozen Bathtub Gin was amazing, huh? And I was like, no, actually it was just kind of, it was on jam-filled night, and it didn't really jam that much, so kind of got overshadowed. So there's like these, it doesn't always kind of knock it out of the park. And when I told a friend I was doing Bathtub Gins for this, she was like, really, gin? I was like, yeah, there's great versions. If you have liked what I've talked about, I definitely recommend checking out Amar Guitar on YouTube. He does a total breakdown of another version of Bathtub Gin, and he does it live with like video and musical notation. It's really well done. He does the Great Went Gin, which I was actually going to do tonight, and then I was like, oh, he already did one, so I'll do a different one. But if you like this kind of stuff, you want to hear that, you want to hear some of these terms on a video that you can pause and go back to and whatnot, you can definitely check that out too. Other questions or anything else?
Well, maybe
Yeah.
it's also worth noting that for better or worse, maybe, the Bathtub Gin jam, Trey often falls back onto that when he's jamming in another song, like during the Baker's Dozen. I think they fell into a gin jam like 3 times or something like that.
Yeah, well, so
It's a little bit of a crutch.
when we talk about a gin jam, we're often talking about this sort of 1/4 alteration, you know? So this like, that is just a really typical, that's just a really typical chord progression in rock. And yeah. Oh yeah. The da 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 da. Yeah. That comes back a lot. But Mixolydian jamming is also something that really comes around a lot in Phish jamming. So I think that is also what I was talking about when like we give them grief about ending a jam early. It's like, well, maybe they didn't have any more good ideas, on that particular jam, Maybe Trey was just like, nah, I don't want to do this anymore. But yeah, I picked 2 versions that I think are spectacular, and you may not have liked these 2 versions. And there are many other Bathtub Gin, versions of Bathtub Gin out there. I've heard the song probably over 50 times, and I can really sort of fall back on like 3 that were like truly like, whoa, remarkable. And the rest were just great, average great, so. Yeah.
Would you recommend seeing Phish live?
Yes. Yes. Playing at the Providence Civic Center in the weekend after Thanksgiving. Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the cool things about seeing Phish live is that when you are surrounded by people who are picking up on these cues, if you are not picking up on these cues, you can get the sense that something really cool is happening, and that there's a kind of, people are really tuned into this. I always tell my friends who aren't into Phish, if they want to come to a show, I'm like, you're not necessarily going to love it, but you're going to have a good time, and maybe you'll love it. So, I think that this experience of really sort of breaking it down can be really enlightening if you're a total neophyte and you've never heard Phish, or if you're like really into Phish. I don't know if the casual fan would love this sort of deep dive stuff, but maybe it deepens your appreciation for it too. So if that's the case, great. That's kind of what I try to do anyway. So make people like music more by talking about it deeply. Yeah. Sure. Well, Goose, no, I'm just kidding. So I think that what Phish does that other bands don't do is Phish has 30 years of doing this behind them so that they aren't even thinking about these sort of musical communications. The other thing that Phish does that's quite, people often ask, how is Phish different than the Grateful Dead? And I also love the Grateful Dead. But the Grateful Dead doesn't really do this sort of type 2 jamming in the same way. The Grateful Dead sets up a space and explores the edges of it, right? So you think of Dark Star. Dark Star is like 2 chords, goes to other chords sometimes, but it's really all about sort of exploring the possibilities around the space in the middle of this central idea that is Dark Star. You're not getting like a jam segment and then another jam segment and then another jam segment and then another jam segment. Sometimes you do get a lot of different kind of feelings and moods in a Dark Star, but you can't really compare them to Phish. They both are improvisational rock bands, but Phish does a lot more of this sort of goal-directed jamming where they will build to a peak or they will sort of see a progression through to its natural end. And then I find the Grateful Dead does that a little less, for example. As far as like newer jam bands, I think a lot of them, a lot of the newer improvisational rock bands, they grew up listening to Phish, some of them, So they are sort of inheriting some of this musical language. I think the whole idea of a jam band is kind of based a little bit on what Phish does, So I don't know if I'm answering the question or not, but I think Phish is unique in ways that other bands are unique too. And Phish doesn't jam like Humphreys McGee, and Humphreys McGee doesn't jam like Phish, and that's okay. That's 2 different sort of things, huh? They never will. But that's a good thing, It's not like because Humphreys McGee is really good at doing what they do, right? And Phish is really good at doing what they do. You can like one more than the other, and I have plenty of friends who like what Humphreys McGee does more than what Phish does, but, so I don't know if that answers the question or not, but, I think, what all improvisational rock bands do is listen to each other, and that is the shared sort of common denominator amongst all of them. And so if you are a band that really knows how to listen to your bandmates and respond to them in real time, then you are doing something that Phish does. Any other questions? Yeah.
So on that note, during that polyrhythmic
Yeah.
riff, so Trey sounds like at the beginning he's coming back to the riff,
Yeah.
and then like Mike goes to that G,
Right.
and all of a sudden Trey gets like dissonant. So is that Trey trying to pull it back and Mike being like, no?
Yeah, let's listen. See, it sounds like it's going to come back here, right? I think it's Fishman that actually really initiates no, we're not going to do anything normal right now. We're going to get weirder by totally losing the beat. And that's where I think that is probably what Trey is most readily responding to is, because Trey and Fishman kind of have this, special buddy relationship, I think. Fishman is unique as a drummer because he plays melodically. He follows what the melody instrument is doing on his drums, even though he doesn't have pitched instruments. And so I think that, Trey hears Fishman going away from the normal beat there, and he goes, okay, I'm not going to play the Bathtub Gin riff in the normal way then. But I'm still going to play the Bathtub Gin riff, and that's the brilliant part. That is the sort of true nature of psychedelia as a sort of musical idea, where you're taking something very familiar and distorting it into a place where it's kind of dark and weird, right? That is going back to people who theorize about what constitutes musical psychedelia often cite that sense of something familiar but wrong. And if you have, done psychedelic drugs, you probably also understand that idea of this is very familiar, but it's wrong. And so, I think sometimes we sort of de-emphasize, scholars like to say, well, psychedelic rock isn't really about the psychedelics, but it is. And, we have to sort of come to terms with that, and that's okay. So, there is that sort of, that familiar unfamiliarity that I really like about this particular jam. Yeah.
So we'll see you next Wednesday for a Yem breakdown?
Yeah, sure. No, if you see me at a show, come up and say hi. I don't do this during shows, so you don't need to worry about it. I will not chomp in your ear about what's happening. I don't bring my piano. I don't write down. Actually, I don't have the best ear. Like as a sort of music scholar, my ear is not as good as other music scholars, and so it's easy for me to shut off my analytical mind because I don't have I have to like work a little harder to turn it on. But people are always asking me like, oh, is this, like, man, it must be crazy to like see a show like for you. You must be constantly thinking about like key changes and stuff. And I'm like, I'm really just dancing like I'm doing the same stuff you guys are. But afterwards I might be like, oh, there was that really cool, like, sort of weird Lydian thing that they did during, Choctaw torture, and someone will be like, So, yeah.
How do I explain to my wife why I keep going back?
Yeah. I'm sorry, man. Well, I think that as long as you are happy, that's all that matters. Yeah. I think I sort of build this as like maybe you'll maybe you can understand why your spouse, brother, child goes to 100 shows. The fact the people go. Somebody made an analogy between sports and Phish recently, and especially baseball. You go see a baseball game. It's basically the same 9 guys on the field. It's more or less going to be the same kind of thing over and over and over again. But the sort of the beauty lies in the differences between each game, right? And there's a couple home runs, and some games it's just really boring, And I think Phish is similar. The nice thing is that your team almost always wins, and even a lot of people like to say, even a average Phish show is better than pretty much anything else you could do on a given night. So I kind of subscribe to that. But yeah, I would say, does she have female Phish friends?
No.
That's a.
But she lets me.
Yes. Well, that's good then. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think we're just building on what you're saying. I think that one of the things that musicians have to come to terms with is the phenomenon of repetition.
Yeah.
That you learn music and you have to repeat it. You have to do it over and over and over again in order to master it.
Right.
And then if you become a professional, you have to play it over and over and over again for audiences.
Right.
Because they want to hear it.
Right.
And if you're a listener, you hear the music that you love over and over and over again because you love it.
Right.
And because it takes more than once to get a song or tune or a particular track into your head, into your consciousness.
That's why I liked.
It takes more than once.
That's why I like this sort of vertical tasting
And I think
process.
That, I think that jamming is one of the ways that you come to terms with, as a musician and as a listener, hearing music over and over and over again, because that's what we do. When we create music, when we listen to music, it's partly about repetition. Once through a tune, nobody gets it. Nobody will ever remember it.
Right. That's why no one likes the new songs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But 15 times through, you might begin to say, "Oh, I kind of like that,"
Yeah.
or to say, "Oh, I could do something with that."
Mhm.
And I think that this is one of the most interesting ways of reacting to the phenomenon of repetition is just crucial.
Yeah, I mean, that, you know, there a frequent criticism of Phish is that it always sounds the same. So this is my attempt to show that no, it doesn't. You know, there is a lot of difference.
I think
Yeah,
it does and it doesn't.
it does and it doesn't. Yeah,
It does and it
absolutely.
doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on that. Oh, yes.
So, question for you.
Yes.
So, should I go to my 20th year class reunion next Saturday?
No. Come on. Thanks. Thank you guys all so much. Thanks.